C-Suite Edge. I'm your host, John Light, president of Sabretooth Recruiting. And today I'm very fortunate because a space that we play in often in my business is that banking, fintech area in our economy. But today I've got somebody who's got a ton of history in it, Rouzbeh Rotabi. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, John, for having me. Very nice to get together and talk through all things scaling organizations, banking, fintech, and the ever-changing landscape of compliance.
Oh, man. Well, if you're going to come in with something that sounds so smooth like that, maybe we should switch roles here and you should be the host on this one. All kidding aside, although sometimes I wonder if I am kidding about that, but all kidding aside, I'd love to hear, if you could, maybe a 90-second overview of your journey, your path from where you started and how you ended up where you're at today. Because today, in a chief revenue officer role, a person who's driving really everything that makes a company tick, I think it's a role that's going to only take on more prominence, not just in this industry space, but many others. So how did you end up here?
Yeah, so it's an interesting career journey. I was an accountant out of college. I studied accounting. I was an accountant out of college. And my goal was to be a cost accountant. I idolized my grandfather, who was an accountant for UNICEF back in Iran. And what I realized quickly after jumping into the business, you had to put in a lot of work to have the impact that you want to. So for someone that's young, gung-ho, and wants to make an impact in the organization or the firm that you work at, you had to pay your dues. And I felt that there was a lot of ideas that weren't being leveraged. So I got out of that. And I leveraged my understanding of tax, accounting, P&L, balance sheets, et cetera. And a lot of my friends worked at a company called ADP, Automatic Data Processing, the largest payroll company in the world. And they said, you should go into sales. You should leverage your technology, understanding your systems and accounting knowledge, and apply it to a sales mindset. Went there for 5 years. And ironically, I sat out the entire startup landscape when I lived in San Francisco. I lived there from 1996 to 2010, but I sat out the entire dot-com boom and bust. That's how old I am. And I jumped into a startup in 2003 when I joined Wildcard Systems as a business development leader selling into the banks. So from there, I really went into understanding payments, how money moved. It was always fascinating to me. Being a first-generation immigrant myself, we moved here. My dad couldn't get credit. We couldn't buy a home. So I wanted to understand the intricacies of the financial service ecosystem and how to apply my knowledge so that A, I could better my life, but B, is there something we could do better in the system? Over the years, I've ran sales, business development, customer success teams, and most recently, I'm at the CRO at Colo. We're a full stack issuer processor and a ledger company. But my sweet spot is joining a company that's got product market fit, scaling the organization, and figuring out what the accelerant is to 10x, 100x, whatever it may be, the organization that as it's going through a period of, we found our customers, we found our space in the market, and we really want to grow. The joke I make with folks that are more traditional engineers is there's a term that we all use, full stack engineer. I apply that to myself because of sitting in different seats on the revenue side. You see different problem sets. I try not to over-rotate to sales. I try not to overrate to customers. It's about how do you build, going back to your point, John, a scalable and efficient CRO function that fits into the corporate organization.
Yeah, you said a term to me earlier. I think it was full stack revenue leader.
Yeah.
And it just struck me as this extremely descriptive term. I have people I work with from time to time who are in what I would call revenue enablement, revenue operations. And to your point, I think it's critical that people in that space who take on that sort of role have an eclectic background. Is that a good way to put it? Because you don't want to be too much of one thing or too little of another. You've got to have that Goldilocks experience and skill set that allow you to see the whole picture.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the things that lets you see that whole picture, if you over-rotate to selling too much in an early stage company or mid-stage company, you're going to have a consumption or processing of those opportunities in the organization. You're fundamentally not going to be able to onboard and deliver a positive customer experience if you sell to everyone, if you sell outside of your ideal customer profile, or if you just you create gluttony. And through that gluttony, what you do is you create thrash downstream in customer success, in account management, in finance and revenue operations, and you're creating a lot of extra work rather than sticking to a script or sticking to a GTM thesis and delivering on that. And having sat on both sides of that fence, it keeps me balanced in my mind. Say yes to cool new ideas, but don't say yes to everything. Don't say no to everything from an operational mindset because you're struggling to execute on a day-to-day basis. That's the world we live in a scale up or a startup organization. It's not a 40, 50-year company like an ADP or an IBM or whoever.
Yeah, it has so much mass and momentum. It's how do you stop it?
Yeah, you can't stop the cruise ship. You can barely turn it.
Yeah, well, I've had a little bit of experience on boats and ships, and yeah, it's a chore. It's a chore, that massive momentum, and I think there's also a generation. I've had some really interesting conversations lately. I think there's a generation of entrepreneurs coming up who are in the startup phase all the way up to Series A. They're early stage, and they have this mentality of we need to get this revenue piece right the first time, because they have the lived experience where we've leaned too far one way or the other. There are too many new customers coming in, delivery can't keep up because we didn't build the right structure for that and have it balanced. And I think part of the proposition too is that not everything is built around this idea of go, 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 but rather let's go in a balanced way and bring the whole function forward, if that makes sense. And I think that's
It
part of what
does.
I
And
hear
I'll
you
go
saying.
even further. Bring the whole company forward.
Right.
If you think about it, how do you is it better to get 15 customers that are paying, scaling, whether you have a consumption or a license model and moving forward? Or is it better to sell 45 and only be able to implement 7? I think we would all
Mhm.
take A in that case.
Yeah.
You would want the 15 on 15 rather than 40 on 7. And then you have to deal with customer fallout, customer triage, and then you're just getting into reactive mode, which I think it's fool's gold. Getting a lot
Hmm.
of customers is fool's gold. Getting the right customers to give you feedback and iterate and develop a better product or a better solution is the real gold.
It's where the riches are for sure. So tell me, so what when you look at this whole holistic piece of revenue as the full stack revenue leader, what do you think the biggest challenge or problem is that you attack and solve?
Yeah. I think depending on where your organization is, from a revenue standpoint, the biggest thing is the team aligned? If you have a
Hmm.
team, if you're earlier, you might just have 3 or 4 people. You might have 1 or 2 functions. But are those two aligned? Because it only gets exponentially worse. So if you're a small startup and you got $1 million, $1 million in ARR, you might only have one salesperson or maybe founder-led sales with a director of sales, and then you got a customer success person. The proximity, the process, and the documentation that you create at that point should continue to be a first principle as you expand beyond that. Because what's going to happen is as you add a rev ops function, as you add 2 more salespeople, as you add 15 more customers, you're going to
Hmm.
get that much more disconnected. And in today's world, most companies are remote or they're somewhat regional geolocated offices, but you have to create that throughput. And the way I think about it is revenue lifecycle management. So from that
Hmm.
first call to that first dollar of revenue, is everyone aligned in what their job and their function is to create a great customer experience? And that's a bonus. Don't solve for the company, solve for the customer. If you work backwards from there, you will have delivered the right experience. If your onboarding experience or your sales process or your legal process thinks with a customer centric mindset, you'll see each one of those split times from first call to revenue cut down.
Great point. And even though people probably cannot see it if they're watching the video, and they certainly can't see it if they listen to the audio of this, I've got a pen in my hand and I'm taking notes because I like the way you put that. You got to solve for the customer first,
You
which is
do?
what all companies should do. I mean, in theory, right? I mean, we're delivering a service, we're delivering a product. We want to have something that people actually purchase and be happy about.
Yes.
And to
Yes.
do that, do we do it because it's just strictly from our own experience set, or because we are fortunate enough to have customers who will share with us what makes sense from their perspective? And that kind of
And then to
brings
go back
me,
to your earlier point, which is instead of
yeah.
trying to hit a certain metric
Hmm.
of revenue or customers or anything, it lets you scale accordingly. Because if you think about it, if you chase a number, whether it's number of customers or revenue, you might make short term decisions that impact you gravely
Hmm.
or badly long term.
Sometimes you just got to take what the market's willing to give you.
Yep.
You got to see it for what it is and take it and go to the next and so on. Brings me to another question. When you look around the space that you're in and you look at fintech and payment processing, but kind of layer on top of that this functionality of a chief revenue officer, how do you see that evolving over the next few years? I mean, we've got a lot of things happening in our economy right now and into the near
We
term.
do.
What do you see is going to happen?
I think there's two big things that are going to happen. You have to understand how to get alignment across the organization. If
Hmm.
you're in charge of selling the end product, you have to be able to be willing to go out into the market with prospects. And as you win and lose deals, and as your customers grow or churn, you're sharing that feedback internally. You're not asking the team to make every single exception or meet every single customer or prospect's demand,
Right.
but you are asking them to, you're giving them a full picture of what the market looks like. And I can't bring you to the front lines, but I can bring the frontline data to you so we can all
Hmm.
coalesce around that. The second thing that I think about is how are you interacting with the community? How are you interacting and building your company's brand awareness if you're in a startup or an earlier stage company? If you're in a later stage company, how do you continue to detail and exemplify the differentiators that you've created and that got you to 20, 30, 40, $50 million in revenue? So
Hmm.
by creating a community, by doing social proofing when you have a customer go live, how are you bringing that to market? Because right now, especially, people want to buy from people they know or and solutions they trust. So I think you have to be a good mayor of the town, if you will, internally, and you have to be an advocate externally. And I have some other thoughts on like sales motions at a higher level.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. So I'm curious because when you talk about alignment and we talk about bringing the whole organization forward to solve a problem for the customer versus, oh, just rev, 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 or deliver, deliver, deliver. And this is not a question I told you to prep for, so it's kind of off the cuff. I mean, how do being a headhunter for over 20 years, I think about this all the time, but when you look for people to fit this sort of functionality, what does good look like? What are the qualities and characteristics that you like to see? And you go, bam, that's the profile. That's what good looks like.
Yeah. Again, I'm going to focus where I've mainly spent my time in Series A to Series E companies and then gone public. I haven't worked for too many large scale companies like an
Hmm.
Oracle or an SAP. There's three things that I always look for. One is, do you have the tenacity and the ability to show up and the persistence every single day? Are you a known quantity? And what I mean by that is, do I know how John's going to show up to work every day and I don't have to question that? Because that
Hmm.
takes a lot off my plate. I think you could stress test for that during an interview process by doing a case study. How do they show up for the case study? Are they prepared? Are they treating
Hmm.
it too casual? Are they actually just not even into it? Or do they get really analytical? And you could see where their strengths are and where their
Hmm.
areas for opportunity are. But one thing you see for sure is their commitment and their ability to deliver. The second thing I look for is, have you done the early stage? Have you done the mid stage company experience before? Again, if you don't work at a big company, there's not a lot of things packaged on the shelf that you put in an email, send off, and everything gets answered. So you have to be able to make sure that you understand what you're trying to um, communicate externally and what support staff you
Hmm.
do have internally. And last but not least, it's just, are you about execution? And especially in earlier stage companies, strategy is great to a point, but it's more like people say, "What's your strategy?" I actually substitute that with, "What's your execution plan?" Your strategy is to be the best payments provider in commercial payments. Okay, that's what Colos is. That's what our mission is. And what
Right.
we're aiming to do is build a solution that is four deltas better than anyone else in our field. And that's really what we're aiming to do by building a unified ledger, by building other services that most people would have to go to three or four different companies to get from one provider. So it's, are you clear and articulate about the differentiation, and do you understand it? And the bonus I always
Awesome.
put on this one
Yeah.
is, do you bias for action? Meaning, if you're going to go do something, do you do it immediately and haphazardly, or do you
Hmm.
think it?
Hmm.
Are you think, do, or are you think, do, think? It might sound quirky, But I love people that think about it for a hot minute. They know their answer is not going to be right or wrong. You're not
Hmm.
solving for accuracy. You're solving for speed and feedback or information.
Interesting. Interesting. Well, it's funny because I just wrote down on your third point bias towards execution. And
Yes.
I started to write bias towards action or bias into action, but action to me connotes something more broad, and execution feels like we're taking strategy and executing at a tactical level. Am I doing
Yeah.
the things that will realize or bring to life the strategy we're working on? But
Yeah. There's
I
a
think
saying
it's
I have: don't mistake activity for progress. Just
yeah,
because you're busy doesn't mean you're progressing.
yeah. When you have
There's
enough
many times
teenagers
while they're
telling,
busy. Sorry, go ahead, John.
I'll say if you have enough teenagers that you tell to go clean their room, oh man, I've been working hard on it, or their homework, I've been working hard on it. What have you actually accomplished? You want to go look? No, no. Let me go back to it.
It sounds like you're in our house on Wednesdays when we talk about grades.
Well, let me ask you this, okay? Because I know coming here, launching in 2025, beginning of the year, if someone wanted to get in touch with you, Rouzbeh, have a conversation, dive in some more, or maybe even become a customer, uh, what would be the best way for them to find you?
Well, they can get to me on LinkedIn, Rouzbeh Rotabi. My name will be on the podcast. And then as far as the company, it's Colo, QOLO.io. You can go to the website, and we're revamping the website. Just so you know, we're about 75% of the way through that. And that's the best way. And then my email is just rouzbeh.rotabi at Colo, QOLO.io, for people to get in touch, talk all things payments, talk all things staffing, fintech, startup, scale up. Those are the things that interest me and keep me young at heart.
Young at heart's the way to be. Thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate what you shared.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having me and look forward to working with you guys.